Sir, this amending bill is quite a healthy one, and on behalf of workers, I think we would be justified in welcoming the various provisions of the bill. It was but natural and justifiable that the Indian Airlines and the Air India Corporation should be brought within the jurisdiction of the central sphere. But at the same time, I take this opportunity to bring one particular fact to the notice of the Labour Ministry, that the provisions of the Industrial Disputes Act are not being properly extended to the concerns that have already been brought under the jurisdiction of the centre. I am referring to the railways. As a matter of fact, the Industrial Disputes Act is applicable to the railways, but it is well known that the administration has persistently refused to abide by the provision, and therefore I should like to request the government that they should be very particular about the effective implementation of the provisions of the Industrial Disputes Act in the various concerns which are brought within its purview, that the dispute between an employee and an employer should be an industrial dispute. No doubt, we stand for the growth of a strong trade union movement, and as such, we should like to see that every workman is represented through the union, and that every industry should have only one union, so that the principle of one industry, one union should be brought into practice. Nevertheless, under the present circumstances, it would be unjustifiable to deny the workers their right to get their cases represented through a union or through their own lawyers or themselves. As such, this particular provision under the present circumstances deserves to be welcomed, though we should like to see that in times to come there should be growth of healthy trade union movement under which every workman would be represented through some union or the other. The lay-off compensation would become payable for all the days of lay-off beyond the first 45 days, whether the period is continuous or not. This is also a welcome feature of this bill, because as we all know, our employers have been experts in depriving labor of its legitimate dues. Various devices have been adopted to this effect on many occasions. I would like particularly to mention the device of continuing workmen for years together as temporary just through some technical lacuna. Mr. Vice Chairman, it is a very good amendment introduced now by the Labour and Employment Ministry for amending Section 2. It will stop the Indian Airlines and the Air India Corporation adopting a method which would be putting the public of this country to great difficulties, as we have been experiencing. Hitherto, they were not brought under the purview of the Industrial Disputes Act, and therefore they had no other chance or source or approach than to demonstrate by getting themselves under checklist by a doctor's certificate, or adopting some go slow policy, or by offering satyagrah or something else. This introduction of the IAC and the Air India Corporation into the Industrial Disputes Act and bringing them under the purview of this act will avoid the future such activities of the staff of these bodies. That has been one of the main objectives in the last session. When the Industrial Disputes Act was first amended, we had insisted on the government to see that these concerns are brought under the act and a provision is made for them to seek the law instead of going in for direct action. This will stop hereafter such activities of the staff of the IAC and the Air India Corporation. I do not find fault with the staff of the IAC or the Indian Air India Corporation, because there will be no smoke if there is no fire. The bureaucratic administration at the head of these is the cause for creating grievances, and since the staff did not have any other recourse, they adopted them, but hereafter they will not adopt such untoward activities which put the public and the traffic in difficulties. Next, the insertion of Section 2A is a good one. Discharges, dismissals, retrenchments or termination of the services of individual workmen will hereafter be deemed as an industrial dispute through some of the trade union organizations in this country may not like such an insertion, because they will be thinking that they do not have sufficient membership in the trade union. We, true to our democratic socialist tendency and Gandhian philosophy, give democracy to everybody, and therefore, whether they join a trade union or not, we give them some trade unions to exploit the situation and live on such dismissals, and even go to some of the administrators and managements and ask them to discharge some workers so that they will have some job to do. Such things hereafter will not be given room, and the individual worker will have an approach to the court for getting redress of his grievances. Sir, the present pattern obtaining in the education system of our country is like this. First of all, there is what is called the pre-primary stage or the nursery school, then comes the primary stage, and then comes the higher elementary schools, and then the 3 years education in the higher secondary schools. This higher secondary system has been formed by the addition of 1 year to the high school system, or by taking away 1 year from the intermediate side and adding it to this side. The university course took 4 years, 2 years for the intermediate and 2 years for the degree course. Out of this, 1 year of the intermediate course was taken away and added to the higher secondary system. This is the system that came into existence. The higher secondary system reduces the university course to 3 years and the intermediate course is abolished. The intermediate colleges, as they were called, were converted into pre-university course colleges. This pre-university course comes after the student has passed the 3-year higher secondary course. This is the system obtaining now. Now, let us see the objects of this resolution. This change has brought in its wake certain defects and disadvantages. Let me point out these disadvantages either in the pre-university system or in the higher secondary system. Talking of the higher secondary system, I would like to say that certain schools were simply upgraded to higher secondary schools by tagging on 1 year of the university course to the existing course. There arose the question of equipment necessary for such a course, which may not have been there in many of the schools. I know of a number of schools which were unfit to teach the university course of 1 year, but still sanctions have been given for converting the secondary schools into higher secondary. There has not been sufficient equipment, especially for science laboratories, etc., nor have there been enough for teachers capable of teaching the 1 year university course. This, according to me, is a very great and serious disadvantage, especially to the boys coming from the rural areas who have not had sufficient grounding in the various stages of their school education. The higher secondary or the pre-university course is a gateway. Unless he crosses that, he cannot go over to any technical course or to the university. Madam, what I feel is that there is a sudden rise in standard, whether it be the pre-university stage or the higher secondary stage. In this stage, suddenly pupils are asked to give essay type of answers, whereas in the secondary school stage, it is only filling up all the gaps of words or phrase or to be given for a proper pass. And this is all compressed in 1 year. There is an enormous stepping up so far as the subjects are concerned, and on top of it, the whole thing has been compressed into 1 year. It may be all right, madam, for students coming from the educated classes or the upper urban classes where the grounding has been quite good. Not only they are educated in school, their knowledge is further supplemented by the tutorial system by parents and others in the house. So even if the course is compressed into 1 year, they can probably follow, they can manage. But the students coming from the rural areas who have no grounding whatsoever find it extraordinarily difficult to cope up with this pre-university or the higher secondary system of education. I can also show by figures how awful wastage has been there in this pre-university system. The duration of courses of only 180 days is insufficient to enable him to assimilate whatever is taught to him. Even lectures he is not able to absorb and assimilate. After all, if education is not absorbed and assimilated, it serves no purpose. It is a different thing that he gets a pass, but subsequently in life, in technical courses, he finds a lot of difficulty. Madam, I happen to be in charge of a certain hostel where students seeking university education from the rural areas have been given a dominant place where free feeding is done. The hostel is situated in Bangalore city, and we find that not even 1% pass out completely in any year ever since this pre-university course has been introduced. I think it was introduced in 1956 to 1957. Ever since that time, the students have been finding it difficult to pass. Madam, I have been managing this hostel since 1940 in the intermediate system somehow because it was a 2 year period. They slowly and steadily learned something, absorbed and assimilated something. In the intermediate system, there was a possibility for the science students to conduct experiments, but in the pre-university stage, no chance seems to be given to the students to conduct experiments either in physics or chemistry. Full stop. Over.